Good. All right. Looks like some people are here. Ready to get going?
I'm ready.
All right. We will get started. Welcome, everybody who's here. For those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. John Stracks. I'm one of the founders of Cormendi Health here in Chicago, a mind-body medicine practice that we opened up 5 years ago. Those of you who are interested can find out more about our practice at CormendiHealth.com.
And I'm Lisa Stracks. I'm the other co-founder of Cormendi Health. I manage a lot of the administration and communications and other aspects of running the practice. But I also have a lot of conversations with Dr. Stracks about how to help people learn more about mind-body medicine in general, as well as health and parenting and relationships.
And for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, we are married too.
Yes.
This webinar is part of a short series that we're hosting on interpersonal contributions to chronic pain and other symptoms. Most of you know a lot, those of you who are listening know a lot about how our personalities and our stressors will contribute to symptoms, but relationships with family members and intimate partners, those are also pretty frequent contributors to what we experience physically. And we don't hear as much about that, I think, when we talk about mind-body medicine. And so we want to talk about how we can leverage those relationships to help us heal. And Lisa and I have longstanding relationship both with each other and with mind-body medicine. And so we thought it would be helpful for people to hear our own experiences with all of this. And so tonight we're going to talk some about Lisa's experience with mind-body medicine, a lot of experience, and there are plenty of places to learn about that. We also want to talk about our experiences with our families and our children. We would like to leave time for questions at the end. And if you have them, go ahead and type them into the Q&A box at any point while we are talking, and we will get to those at the end. As I said, I've told my story numerous times, and you can find links to that through our website. But Lisa's experience is less well known, but equally dramatic. And so we're going to start by talking about you and your history of migraines, which you used to have regularly. And I knew about that when we first met. And I remember the very first time that you had a really significant migraine and you stopped being able to talk. And I really thought you were having a stroke. And I was about to call 911. You're just like, oh, no, it's just a migraine. I'll be fine. And so what do you remember what it was like when you had migraines like that?
I do, and I've been having a little bit of flashbacks as I've thought about this conversation. So the first time I had a migraine, I was about 12 or 13, and I really didn't know what hit me. I was also on a camping trip, and so I was in unfamiliar surroundings, and I'm sure that didn't help. But the pain was excruciating, and I thought I was going to die. So I learned very early on to recognize the signs of an impending migraine so I could get to a safe place. My first signal was that I would lose vision in one of my eyes, usually my left eye. And then I would have this part of my body go numb. It was the strangest thing. It was like moving, it would be numbness that would move up my arm, from my fingertips, up my arm and out my elbow. And I was very grateful for those symptoms because I knew I had about a half an hour before the pain really hit and I could no longer function. So as soon as I felt that, I would scurry home and get into a safe place. I would turn off all the lights. I would turn off all the noise, make it as quiet and dark as possible, take my medication, and try to go to sleep before the pain really hit. When the pain did hit, it felt like I was just being stabbed in my skull, and that would go on for hours until it finally was over. So I would also have really bad nausea. And so I could see why when I tried to hide under the covers and make it very, very quiet and very, very dark, like how you would think that I was having a stroke.
I would get migraines occasionally when I was little, not since you and I I met, I think, but I've had one in like the last 25 years. And it was that like ice pick in the eye socket
Mhm.
kind of one. I sort of remember back and how painful um, that was for you. And it seems both like a long time ago and still fairly recent. So anyway, you and I were dating. We weren't married. We were dating when I first learned about mind body medicine. Um, and so when I first learned about it, like I was then and still am kind of obsessed with it. And so I would talk about it regularly. What do you remember about that? Do you remember it being useful for you at all? And think about, people are listening who have partners and family, and a lot of them struggle with how to talk to people close to them about this. So like, was it helpful when I would say like, hey, you should think about this?
Um, I thought it was a great idea in theory. And I was really excited that it was helping you because I lived through your story of healing with you. I even started reading Dr. Sarno's book, and it was all about anger and how repressed anger led to pain. And in fact, Dr. Sarno himself was angry enough that I could feel the anger coming out of the book. But since I was a good girl and I didn't get mad, it didn't really apply to me.
Got it. And then you had a breakthrough. So tell us
I
about it.
did. I did. That was quite a breakthrough. We were living in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago, across from the University of Chicago. You were in med school, which was super busy, but it wasn't impossible because we didn't have kids yet. And I was working as an editor. We were living in this co-op building, which was full of stereotypical university types. And I had somehow gotten elected to the board of the building. I remember it was a beautiful spring afternoon and something happened with someone in the building and I got called into the situation. I don't even remember what, but I started getting the aura and I started getting the numbness. And so I headed for bed. And so you said, why don't you tell me what you're upset about? And I said, I'm not upset. And you said, are you sure? And so we went back and forth a little bit. And finally, you challenged me to write down something that was bothering me, just one thing. And I was like, fine, whatever. I have a few more minutes before the pain hits. I'm just going to indulge you. So I wrote something down. I think it was about you not hanging up your coat or something that seems pretty tame compared to the size
Something
of
that
the...
I can do regularly.
Right. Something pretty tame compared to the size of the migraine that was coming on. So, but then I wrote down something else. And then I wrote down something else. And before I knew it, I had written 3 full pages, 3 full notebook pages, and the migraine was gone. And I wasn't sure what to do about that. I wasn't sure what to do about the fact that I had 3 pages of things that I was upset about because I didn't even know how to say I was mad about things yet. I wasn't sure what to do about the fact that the migraine was gone. And I wasn't sure how to trust that that had actually happened.
And do you remember, I mean, this was a long time ago, right? This was before Annika was born. And so 20 years ago. Do you happen to remember what kinds of things were on that list? And so the first one was, I didn't hang up my coat, just like I didn't put the plastic bag away yesterday, but that's another story. But do you have any sense of like what kinds of things might have been on that list?
I think it went from, like I said, you not hanging up your coat or being annoyed about something else around the house to gradually getting deeper and deeper into things that I was upset about. And I really wish I had kept that list because that was the first time I think I recognized that I was mad about things. And so I think it got progressively more intense and more real.
About like people on the co-op board or family members or
people on the co-op board. I had gotten merged into a job that I didn't like. And it was really not a good situation. They brought like 3 of us from my company into a fully staffed organization, and we were routinely ignored and patronized. I'm sure the co-op board, like I said, it was a really interesting bunch of characters, and somehow I was trying to be the same person. I'm trying to think what else. There was that fraternity in our backyard that would have parties, and so, you know, any number of things.
Any number of which by itself may have been okay. I talk to people about this regularly, but sort of the whole package together oftentimes is too much for people. And so this is the first time you recognized that sort of being aware of what was going on potentially could abort a migraine. Did you never have any migraines again after that?
I wish I could say that, but it took a few years before I was able to get rid of them completely. But I went from having several a year and between 4 or 5 a year to having 1 or 2 a year. And so it gradually decreased. And what was interesting was that I could also not necessarily forestall them completely the way I did in that experience, but I could make them less severe and of shorter duration. And so just by recognizing what was really going on, I could make them shorter and less frequent. And so that was great.
And anyway, and then like one time you had a last one, right? I mean, last major one. And this involves family. And so just know Mom and Aunt Margot, hi, you guys are on the panel. Thanks for coming. So, but what happened for that last major migraine?
So our daughter, you were finishing up your fellowship. You were looking for a job. It was the recession of 2009. Things were highly stressful. We had 2 little kids, and your parents came to visit, which was wonderful. They would come to visit regularly, and it was great. And I'm so glad that our children got to spend time with them, even though we were living out of state. On this particular occasion, my mother-in-law, who I truly adore, brought this toy. It was a squeaky duck, and that duck squeaked all afternoon. And who was I to disrupt this wonderful time my daughter was having with her grandmother? And so I didn't feel like I could say anything, but I was just totally stressed. And I came down with a migraine with no warning. So I didn't have a chance to head it off. And so I sent everybody off to dinner. I crawled in bed, turned off the lights, turned off all noise, and dealt with it. But I vowed that I would never, ever have a migraine again because I didn't speak up for myself. Julie, I really do love you. I will admit that toy went in the garbage as soon as you left. But yes, I vowed that would be the last time I had a migraine because I didn't speak up for myself.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So speaking up and anger, which I think the two go hand in hand. And so if you're like a lot of patients who come to see me, especially a lot of female patients who come to see me, you probably weren't encouraged to be super angry when you were little.
I was not. And this is a difficult story. And you know that I wear my heart on my sleeve, and I will do that again. When I was growing up, my family, like, everything was fine. People were always fine. We didn't have strong emotions. And when I was in 6th grade, my parents started fighting all the time. And it was awful. And I didn't know what was going on. It was actually 7th grade, which, when you think about the timing, was the time when I started first getting migraines. things were fine for a little while, and then my parents separated and eventually divorced. And clearly that still affects me.
Mhm.
And so I associated anger and fighting with really bad things. And if you got mad, people left you. And so I was never mad.
Mhm.
I didn't know how.
Mhm.
I couldn't love myself.
Mhm. And then in this process of learning that the anger, just because the anger doesn't come out doesn't mean it's not there. And so it was up here in your eye socket or your skull.
Right.
And so you spent a lot of time figuring out how to be angry. And so, or how to be angry even better, how to be angry in a respectful way. And can you talk a little bit about what you've learned and how that's evolved?
Sure. Um, I spent a lot of time talking with you about anger because you're my partner and we do things together. We figure things out together. Spent some time reading about anger and learning that anger is okay. And it's been really, really hard to do that. But it's been very valuable. And I'm sure if I remember correctly, once I learned how to be mad, I probably overdid it for a little while. And so thank you for hanging in there with me while I figured that out. But it was learning to recognize my anger and learning that anger is actually motivation to do better.
Mhm.
And anger is there's a quote from Mark Epstein that anger is a signal that something needs to change.
Mhm.
And so recognizing whether it's, a co-op board member who's out of line or a work situation that's terrible or a coat that needs to be picked up, there's some situation triggering that anger that needs to be addressed in some way, shape, or form. And so learning to see anger as a motivator rather than a destroyer.
Mhm. Mhm. And one of the things that I think about feelings in general, and lots of us grew up in families where the boundaries around feelings weren't clear. And so like one person would have a feeling and then everybody would have a feeling, or you'd have a feeling and then somebody would take it from you. And so I think that, and so anger is not super easy for me either in a lot of different ways. And when we're at our best, I feel like we have, and we'll talk about this in terms of pain too, but there's room for each of us to have our feelings and the other person doesn't have to. And so one story that I remember and actually tell sometimes to patients is that I was coming home from work this is when I worked at Northwestern, and it was like it had been a good day and I was listening to my iPod and the good music is on, and I like walked into the door like in a really good mood, and within 60 seconds we were fighting about something. And like I was like, and like you were pissed off, I was pissed off, and like I grabbed our dog Rossi, and I took him around the block and went for a walk. And I was walking around the block and I was like, I was not mad when I like, this is not my anger. And so I came back home and I said something like, wow, you sound like you're really angry. Tell me what you're angry about. And I have no idea what it was, but my memory of it was like, you could tell me about it. I could listen to it. I didn't have to take it on. And we worked through it in like 30 minutes, whereas at one point in our life, it probably would have taken like 3 days to work through it. And so like trying as hard as we can to keep in mind that that your anger doesn't have to be mine, and vice versa. We don't always get it right. And do you still get angry with me sometimes? Ever?
Heck yeah. About that coat. Yes. And I think that's a really good point because there were two aspects of anger that I had to learn about. One was recognizing my own anger and that wasn't going to destroy me, but recognizing that when you were angry, that was also a motivator, not a destroyer, and that I had to trust that when you got mad at me, that you weren't going to leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so there was a period when I think I needed a lot of reassurance that you getting mad wasn't going to destroy our relationship, and I'm much more comfortable with that now, but it took a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and I've worked hard to work on my own feelings too. And, you know, one of the things that I say to people, or even said to somebody today, is that, you know, at its core, a lot of this is being able to share the feelings and share them respectfully and not overpower people with them. And so sometimes my feelings get big and I can overpower. And I've worked hard to remember that, like, it's just as effective to say, gosh, I'm so mad I could scream, as it is to scream.
Right.
And
Right.
it's a lot easier for the people around me to be able to deal with that if it's conveyed in a little bit more measured way instead of being totally over the top.
Right. And you and I have worked really hard to set up a framework for when we're having big emotions, to
Mm-hmm.
say, I am really angry about X.
Mm-hmm.
And the other person, like, our formula is for the other person to say, thank you for telling me, tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows it to be the originator's emotion without, say, if you have a big emotion, it doesn't mean that I have to take on your emotion, but that I can interact with you having that emotion in a kind and caring and empathic kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually allows things to move forward much more easily while still respecting the fact that you're having this big emotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And right, again, like, we don't get it right all the time, but
No.
we get it right some of the time. Any other suggestions from your end for women or even men out there who are listening, who are told emotions aren't okay, keep your anger inside, you don't want to be unladylike, or any of those messages that girls and women get?
Sure. Like I said, I think the biggest help to me was that Mark Epstein quote, that anger is a signal that something needs to change. And so recognizing anger as a motivator and not a destroyer has been really helpful. Sometimes I will take our dog out for a stomp when I just need to physically burn off some anger. I found journaling really helpful. I've found that, you know, I'm an editor, and so I take great pride in writing neatly. But if I'm really upset, I will scribble things out and have 3 words per page and use red ink and be able to try to get the emotion out that way. I think that having somebody who you're able to interact with in a respectful way about emotions, a trusted friend, your partner, a parent, a counselor, and just have somebody who's able to recognize that your emotions are valid. Emotions just are. That's the other thing that I had to learn, is that emotions just are. And it doesn't mean that they're good or bad. They just exist. And so they're part of what makes us human. And so recognizing that has been really helpful. I think that, you know, I get to talk to you a lot about emotions, but again, having a trusted person to write or to talk with is super helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say that when I was a kid, I did not think that I would be giving a webinar as an adult talking about feeling our feelings, but it's just so frigging important and such a big part of keeping our relationship fresh and loving, and dealing with the kids too, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So anyway, we're going to switch gears in just a second. Before we do, when you start to get a migraine now, what do you do? How do you prevent it from taking hold?
So the only symptom that I still have of my migraines is that I will occasionally get nauseous. when I'm stressed. I haven't had an actual full-blown headache, ice pick, aura, all of that. I haven't had that for 14 years, which is huge. So like I said, the only symptom that I still have is this nausea that will kind of creep up on me sometimes when I'm feeling stressed or when I'm feeling, and it's much less about anger these days than anxiety, I think.
Yeah.
So when that happens, I give myself a lot of grace. I say, okay, I understand I'm really stressed about whatever. I will reach out to you and say, I'm feeling horrible. And you react with kindness and empathy, which I really appreciate. But most of all, I know that if I give myself space to just feel it and feel the feelings, whether that's crying, whether that's writing in my journal, whatever, that in a couple of hours, I'm going to be doing pretty well.
And it's so helpful to have that confidence, right? Because especially with migraines, but really with any pain symptom, some of it is just the uncertainty about, is it going to go away? When is it going away? And if we're not scared of it, and if you have that confidence that you've done this before and you know the drill,
Right.
it's much easier to tolerate it and not to, we talk about migraines, especially as everybody's always taught to get rid of it right away, take the medication, or else you're really in trouble. And so when you know that it's going to go away, you can take it out, you can examine it and look at it.
Right. I have these fleeting thoughts of, oh, here we go again, but not in a, oh my gosh, my world is falling apart, but here we go again. I let this go too long. And now I need to give myself some extra space and extra care because I didn't take care of myself sooner.
All right, so we're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about relationships as it relates to pain and mind-body medicine. Thank you for those of you who've sent in questions so far. We will get to those at the end, and so keep typing them into the Q&A box as we go along. And so, as it has to do with pain, you and I have known each other for several decades. We've been married for 21 years, been through medical school, residency, 2 children, deaths of our fathers, opening up our own businesses, 7 moves, I believe.
8 maybe. Not that we're counting.
And now a daughter off in college in Minneapolis. And so lots of experience with life getting into our bodies. And so people are always asking me in relation to their partners, how do they explain this to people? How do they talk about it? And so you probably have thoughts about this, as we were talking about this in the last few days as we were preparing for this. And I think that something that I find helpful is, like we were talking about with emotions, we allow each other to have our own pain. And so that does a couple of things. One is that if we don't have to be offended by each other's pain, and so we never, as far as I know, like throw it in each other's face and say, like, just get over it. It's not real, which is sometimes what I hear people's partners saying to them after they learn about this. And so, so one story that I will tell sometimes, and Mom, forgive me, but a number of years ago, we went to a family birthday party down in Kentucky, and my father had fallen a couple of weeks before, and he was in a neck brace and couldn't drive. So we all rented a big van, got together, drove together, and my father's politics and my politics aren't exactly the same, and so there were some potentially heated discussions on the way down. And so we got down to Kentucky. We checked into the hotel. We put the kids to bed, and I went to the bathroom, and I came out of the bathroom. I was like, oh, I got a bladder infection. Like, it's killing me. I was like, honey, I got to go to the ER. I'll be back in a little bit. And you didn't make fun of me. You didn't remind me, like, hey, guys, don't get bladder infections. Essentially, you said, like, did you think about whether you're mad potentially? And that was it. I was like, mad. What's to be mad about? And so I think once the kids were asleep, I like went outside behind the hotel, and I was just like, "Ah!" And then it was fine. It was fine. Like, I just needed to get the feeling out, but it was super helpful for you to be able to say, like, hey, before you go to the emergency room, let's just think about this for a second.
Yeah. I remember that story very well. And there are other moments like that that happen regularly. And so I think one thing that's important to point out to people is just because you and I know this and practice this regularly doesn't mean that our bodies don't still feel our feelings for us sometimes. It just is a trigger to help us recognize what's really going on. So I feel a little bit sheepish sometimes that I still get these attacks of nausea, and yet I know that you're going to be kind and sympathetic, and I know that this is my body's way of protecting myself. And so, like, okay, I'm just going to give myself a lot of grace. Or if it's you having a symptom, I'm going to give you a lot of grace, and we're just going to create the space for us to work through whatever each one of us is dealing with.
Mm-hmm. And I know that, we worked hard on this. We make room for each other and each other's feelings. And I know that not everybody can necessarily count on their partners to do that. But the flip side of that is that because we can take responsibility for our pain, we then also don't use it to try to get something from each other. And so we don't use it to get out of doing something. We recognize where the pain's coming from and that we can own it and work on it. And so another example I tell regularly, when we first moved back from Michigan, so in 2009, we moved into a townhouse that we liked in the near south side of Chicago. And then the owner of the townhouse came to us after like 9 months, was like, hey, I'm moving my family back into the townhouse, you got to go. And I was like, all right. And so we looked all around the city and decided we we're going to move into the townhouse across the alley from the townhouse we were living. And it's ridiculous to like hire movers to move you across the alley. So that meant that I was the mover. And like 10 days before we were supposed to move, I threw my back out. And I was like, well, shoot, I know what to do. I'm Dr. Stracks. I can figure this out. And so like I worked on it, and I told myself I didn't need the pain, and like nothing was helping. And so finally, about a week before we move, I came to you and I was like, hey, we gotta hire movers because I threw my back out and I'm not gonna be able to move us. And you said, well, that's great, hotshot, but you don't believe in physical explanations of pain. And I was like, oh, right. I'm Dr. Stracks. And anyway, and then like later that week, I was teaching a class and we were doing some writing exercises. And I was like, I wonder if I'm mad at the landlord. Like, is that possible? I mean, it's his place. He can move himself back in. And so everybody was busy writing. I took out a piece of paper and I was like, I'm gonna write him a letter. And so I took out a pen. I was like, dear landlord, I am going to fucking kill you. And like, am I proud that I was homicidally angry at a guy who was moving back into his own townhouse? No, I'm not proud of that. And within a couple of days, it worked its way out and we just crossed the alley. And I feel like we did
actually hire movers for the heavy stuff.
For the really heavy stuff, but
right.
But it worked out fine. And so, and other times these days, last couple of years, I don't throw my back out very much anymore. If I do, somehow it's when I'm solo parenting for one reason or another. And so you sent me off to a camping trip with, I think, 2 of our own children and 1 of somebody else's. And you stayed home to work on something. And I was taking the cooler out of the van and just like totally locked up. And I promised Harrison I would play golf with him the next day once you got there. Like I had to go to the golf course like with a totally spasmed back and just figure out how to do it. And so I think because we know where it's coming from, we can trust each other that even if the symptoms are there, like we will still participate and we will still be present.
Yes.
Um, I even had a big flare when we opened this practice, and I've reported that on various podcasts, um, it wasn't that I was hurting and couldn't work. It was I was hurting and would figure it out on my own pace. And so we just keep at it and keep sort of thinking on that plane, like my body hurts, but what needs to happen? What do I need to look at in order to make it better?
Sure. I can tell the story about how I threw my back out when I was pregnant with our son.
I
So,
love that one.
oh, that's a good one too. I was in the grocery store and our daughter, who was normally a delightful daughter, for some reason was just being a complete brat and in the grocery store. And I was about 6 months pregnant with our son. And so I get her out to the car. I put her in her car seat. I wrestled the groceries into the back of the car and I slammed the hatchback closed and threw my back out. I was like, and as I closed it, I remember this. I was like, how the hell am I going to do this with two? Slam out. Like it was so clear. And it's not always that clear, but sometimes it's just in that moment, it's just so clear. And so I went home and I got in bed and I worked my way through it. And by the next day I was fine. But
yeah,
it's not often that clear, but sometimes it is.
Yes,
And
it
it's,
is.
yeah.
Let's talk just a little bit about extended family, because our conversations with extended family may be a little bit more similar to what other people are dealing with intimate partners who don't know anything about this. And so, I've had conversations with family members that have gone really well. And so my uncle Will, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but I think it was that same weekend in Kentucky, actually. And he was wearing a neck brace and terrible neck pain. He was taking medications. And we just started talking about some of the work that I was doing. And as we got into it, he's like, wait. It's like, it didn't start really hurting until after I got the MRI results, not before I got the MRI results. And there was this sort of moment of recognition where it's like, oh, there was something besides just the disc that was the problem. There have been conversations that haven't gone particularly well. And so conversation with one of my cousins one day where she was like, well, what do you do? And I was like, well, I treat people's back psychologically. I know your back isn't great. You want to hear about that? She's like, nope. And so, when we talk about how to talk to people about it, not everybody wants to hear, as charming as you and I might be, it's not everybody's cup of tea. And so I think I try to be really cognizant of where somebody's starting from and, what their reaction is like when I start to talk about it. And if, like Uncle Will, they're interested in hearing more, I'm happy to talk about it forever. And if they're not, I think that I don't need to go in the right. I can own my own experience with it. And I feel like that's all I can do. And not everybody is going to be open to it. Your cousins who are not particularly aligned with us politically or medically, like one time one of your cousins called you, was having migraines. And we didn't talk about this at all. And it turned out we were helpful in other ways. We got to recognize that it was a medication that was causing the migraines, and she switched medications and got much better. And so it really is about kind of, assessing the situation and deciding how much we want to delve in and not pushing people into places they don't want to be.
I agree with that. And I've learned to sort of, like you said, like, this is something we do. Do you want to talk about it? And then gauging people's reaction is really helpful. And maybe they come back later and say, so I've been thinking about this a little bit more. And we've even had clients in our practice who have consulted with you, and 5 years later, they came back and say, oh, now I get it. And so sometimes it's a much longer process for people, and sometimes people get it right away. And it just depends on the person and their circumstances.
Yeah, just the other day, somebody came in who we've talked about this multiple times, and something clicked, and so she wanted to hear more, and we talked about it more, and it was really helpful.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it takes a lot of repetition before people really resonate with what we're saying. And so last part of this discussion, and then we'll continue. We'll take some questions. A couple of questions have come in, and so we will answer those at the end. And those of you who have more, keep putting them into the Q&A box. But let's talk about kids and pain. And you and I are clearly completely biased, but I think we have really great kids. I love our kids.
We do.
And one of the things I think we've tried with them, one's a girl, one's a boy, is to be really good about using emotional language with them and encouraging them to use emotional language. And so I feel like, compared to maybe where I was at that age, they're much more comfortable with their emotions, and they can laugh and they can cry and they can get angry. And we taught them communication type. Remember, we would give one of them a spatula, and that was the talking stick, and the other one would have to listen
Yes.
to what they were saying. And so I think that's been super important for them. And then the other thing that I think we've done is be really good about framing pain in emotional language. And so from very early on, when they have headaches or stomach aches, try to ask them what's wrong. And sometimes it's hard to know is it helping or not helping. But a couple of years ago, we were at a family event, and one of my cousin's children spent the entire event on the sofa with an ice pack and a migraine. And it hit me like, we never see that in our kids. I don't ever remember seeing them be totally out of commission with some sort of pain issue. And so it's pretty rare that they have pain issues that last for more than an hour.
True.
Or so.
True.
And one of the things that I think about whether it's our kids or other kids is I think of it as using a really, really light touch with all of this. And so if Harrison has a headache, one of us might say, something happened? Are you mad about something? And just kind of leave it at that. Or we moved a couple of years ago, and so if one of the kids was having feelings about that, maybe we would say, like, hey, you sad about moving and leaving the neighborhood? And again, just leaving it at that and letting them answer or not, or think about it. And I find that with kids, that is by far my preferred strategy. And I know I've had parents who have said, like, they want their kids to journal write every night, or go to therapy and work out the traumas that have happened. But I feel like we've had a lot of luck with our kids with just naming a feeling or two, and being really, really consistent about when they have pain, hearing that the pain is real, not dismissing their pain, not ridiculing them, not making fun of them, but also telling them, letting them know that we're happy to talk with them about it in emotional language.
Yes. And I feel like one of the things that we've done that's helpful is helping the kids learn how to name their emotions, because emotions are very physical. And so if you've got this emotion, but you don't quite know what it is, just being available to say, okay, tell me what's going on. And just being available, and maybe they won't take you up on it right away, but they'll come back later and say, can we talk? Okay, so tell me about what's going on. Oh, how did that make you feel? Did that make you feel scared? Did that make you feel mad? Did that make you feel happy? And just helping them being able to put the name with the emotion, because sometimes in the moment, it's just this physical feeling and it's hard to sort out. And so that, I think, has been really helpful. So again, not pushing it, but when they're ready, saying, okay, let's help you name that emotion.
Mhm.
And then once there's a name for that emotion, then you can sort of say, okay, now what would you like to do about that?
Mhm. Yeah.
And then the other thing that I've worked with our kids is giving them some imagery to think about their emotions. And so we all know the imagery of having butterflies in your stomach when you're nervous. That is a really great example that there's this fluttery feeling. It's not a bad feeling, it's just an awareness kind of feeling. So when our daughter was feeling anxious, we have this rescue dog that we adopted when he was about 6 months old, and he's never fully recovered from the experiences he had in those first 6 months. And so he's on high alert a lot, and he will keep an eye out on the neighborhood, and he will let us know by barking if there's a big dog walking by, if there's a truck or if there's somebody delivering something, or even if there's a leaf that blows up against the window. He's just on high alert. And so we talk about anxiety as being like our dog, Rossi, being on high alert. The anxiety is there to let you know something's going on. And you get to then figure out what that situation is and whether you want to stay on high alert about it, or if you say, oh, it's just a leaf, or it's just somebody delivering something and that situation is calming down. And so having some imagery that kids can access can be helpful as well. I
Mhm.
found that, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, a couple other things to think about with kids in general is that, so much of pain is about safety, and creating safety is a way to decrease pain. And so I had an interesting discussion today with a patient of mine who's a school nurse. And we were talking about how often, kids will show up in her office, but what they really, really need is to know that they're going to be okay. And so they come for the ice pack, but they come for an adult to say, like, it's okay, you're gonna be all right. And so being able to, not lying, like if it's not a safe situation, not pretending that it is, but doing what we can to let kids know that they are safe and they are gonna be okay. I had a patient came into my office one time, and this is more about just understanding the concepts, right? If we don't explain the concepts to kids, then they're not going to know. And so somebody came in, she'd been having pain for a long time, and we were talking about this concept, and I was trying to sort of explain it this way and explain it that way, and she just wasn't buying it. And so we got like 58 and a half minutes into a 60-minute appointment, and all of a sudden she was like, wait, International Baccalaureate. She's like, these headaches started a week after I got into the IB program. And so there was that click, and understanding that, oh yeah, there are non-physical factors that show up. And there's one story, this woman actually, because I saw her probably 10 years ago, and she just emailed as an adult to schedule an appointment with us. But when she was a kid, she had been having those headaches for such a long time, and her mom found out about the concept and told the child about it. And the child was like, wait, headaches started after that stupid soccer party. And like went upstairs and like journal write for like 5 minutes and came down. She's like, thanks, mom. And that was that. And so just giving kids the opportunity to understand that this is how our bodies work really makes a huge difference. And again, light touch, just sort of knowing, letting them think about it, letting them process it on their own, and then being available if they want us to be available, and listening and empathizing and taking their concerns seriously.
I also talk a lot about how we have bodies, we have minds, we have hearts, we have spirits, and they're all interconnected. And so we don't feel our feelings are embodied, but they're also located in our hearts and our minds and our spirits. And so helping kids understand that we don't operate in a vacuum. It's all part of who we are. And that's normal and that's natural. And that's who we are as human beings.
Yeah. And a lot of times it's worked for us. And then there's the time Harrison lost at Monopoly. And he was probably 6 or 7 and stomped off into his room and came out and yelled, "I have a headache," and slammed his door and came out like 10 seconds later. He's like, "And I am not mad." Slammed the door again. But he was out like 10 minutes later. Headache was gone.
Yep.
And so even though he wasn't going to give us the satisfaction of helping him fix the headache, it didn't last.
Yeah.
Because he knew what it was. So we've been talking a long time. And so I do want to take some of the questions that have come in. Any last thoughts about any of this before we take a couple of questions and sign off for the evening?
I just want to emphasize again that emotions are part of who we are and that we're embodied beings. And so if we can't feel the emotions one way, we tend to feel them another way. And so making those connections and being safe, making those connections, you talked about safety a minute ago, but being safe within yourself to experience those emotions in ways that don't harm you physically is really important. And then when you're able, having other people in the conversation with you, whether it's a partner or a friend or a coach, Dr. Stracks, whoever, that can expand the possibilities. But that emotions just are. And so learning how to accept those and trust your emotions and trust your body is really important.
Yeah. A couple questions have come in, mostly about anger and feelings. And so Linda says it's delightful to meet you, by the way. And thinking about expressing anger. And so any steps to gradually reduce the fear of our own anger? She says it always feels like she's about to release the Kraken and destroy everything. And so what kinds of things did you do to gain more comfort with it? Do you remember?
It was a long process. I feel like it's been the migraines ended 14 years ago, but I feel like the migraine in question that really helped me understand better what was going on was probably 18 years ago, 17 years ago, 19 years ago. It was before our daughter was born. So I think the first thing is just to give yourself some grace in knowing that you're not going to get it right the first time or even the second time or the third time. If you need to blow off some steam in a way that gets some of the physicalness of the anger out before you address the anger with whoever it is or whatever situation you're angry about, that can be helpful. Like I said, sometimes I take our dog out for a stomp, or I will write a very angry letter, or I will swear in an empty room at the top of my lungs, or that's often helpful when I'm driving, actually, because it's a very contained space. But being able to physically express the anger and get some of that energy out, I have found is helpful. And then being able to then move into addressing whatever the anger situation is about. That would be it. You're not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay. I think it can be helpful to tell the person that you're working with, I'm learning how to do this, and I'm going to be angry, and I need you to be okay with the fact that I'm angry. If I overdo it, I apologize, but it's important for me to learn how to do this.
Yeah. And there's some really good books out there about anger. The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner is a good one. I also like the book The Language of Emotions by Carla McLaren, and I feel like it's a little bit esoteric, but I feel like there's some really good strategies there for dealing with white hot feelings in a way that that makes them much safer than how we normally think of dealing with anger.
And can you drop those 2 books into the chat so everybody gets those names before we're done?
Yeah.
Right.
This second question is similar, which is what to do when your partner or anybody else doesn't have any interest in hearing about how you're feeling, which I think is extraordinarily common. There are lots of
Right.
do not really feel like we are good or have interest in dealing with other people's feelings. I do think that there are a lot of things that we can do on our own that don't have anything to do with anybody else. And so you had mentioned, journal writing, going for a stomp around the block, like getting the anger out into the pen and paper. One of my colleagues, Jim Detmer, who runs the Conscious Leadership Group, has an exercise where he encourages people to express anger in the form of sound and movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like that. And it doesn't take anybody else. And so a number of years ago, I signed up for a webinar series from a company that I really liked. And it was just friggin' awful. And I suffered through the first few lectures, and I called them at halftime first day and on a Friday. And I was like, hey, this is terrible. Can just give me my money back. I'll walk away. I won't tell anybody about it. And they're like, no, we don't offer refunds. It's like, oh gosh. So I sat through the afternoon and like, it wasn't better. And I had set aside the entire weekend to watch the 3 days of it. And then, you got home and the kids got home, we're making dinner and putting to bed. And I could not calm down. And finally you were like, come on, hotshot, are you mad? What's to be mad about? Like, I love this company and this is awful. They're insulting and arrogant. And I was like, maybe. So same thing, right? So I went down in the basement and like just tried to embody anger. Like I just became anger.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back upstairs. I was like, oh, so I'm gonna turn on the computer tomorrow morning when it starts, and Sunday morning. And so I'm gonna get the CME credits for it. And I'm just gonna have a weekend with you and the kids. And so I didn't have to tell you all about it. And the anger sort of got processed just enough that what I needed to do next became clear, and then moved on. So next question. I really resonate with the fear of losing important relationships if showing strong emotions. What are good ways to learn to allow for and express emotions respectfully? How do we recognize when family members are not reciprocating respect and space? So any thoughts about expressing emotions respectfully?
So I think that one thing to do is that I sometimes do with you is to say, I need you to listen to me. I don't need you to do anything. I just need you to hear me. And I'm really upset about X, Y, or Z. And I understand that this is not something you want to engage with, but I really need to say it out loud. I think one thing, stepping back, is thinking about whether you do need to engage with that person. And so if you do need to engage with that person, deciding ahead of time what you want to get out of that interaction. Is what you really want to tell that person how you're feeling? Or is it that you want something to change? And so you can work on the emotion on your own and then address whatever needs to change with that person without incorporating the emotional component of it. And so I think that is part of it, is especially if you know that people are not always willing to engage with you, thinking about what is your goal in this interaction? And so what piece of you do you want to invest?
I think too that, lots of people who are listening know that I'm a big Dr. David Burns fan and cognitive behavioral therapy. And he's got a lot of really nice examples about sharing emotions respectfully. And he talks about getting mad at a client and saying, look, I got to tell you that when you come in late to every session, I find myself getting angry. And I know that we can work well together. And I know that I've got a lot that I can teach you. And I feel like my hands get tied because we don't have the full time. And so I'm sharing this with you because I think it's gonna be helpful for you, not because I don't want to see you again, not because I think you're a terrible person, but my anger is there because I know that there's much more that we can do than we are doing. And so knowing our emotion words and starting to practice sharing them, using them in our own language and using them when we talk to other people too.
If I can just say one more thing on that, I would also start slowly. Like I would start with a very small piece of emotion and work gradually on that, like feeling like you can share a teeny tiny little part of that is a step forward, recognizing that it could be some time before you're able to share all of your emotion or even trust that you would get to the point where you can. But if you can share just a little piece and gauge how that's going and then continue on.
Yeah. All right, 3 more questions. One is thoughts about anger expression with adult children. They're already got their own issues. They're already stressed. And so it feels like keeping emotions inside is sort of a gift to them, but then that doesn't always work. And also said thank you to you for your candor and vulnerability and sharing.
Thank you.
But thoughts about like not sharing feelings because other people aren't in a place to hear it.
So that goes back to being a boundary issue, I think. And that is to say, to respect their feelings and say, I know you're really stressed. I do have something that I need to talk to you about. Can we set up a time when we can talk about this? And so trying to create a space where you can have that conversation and set aside the time to do it. When you walk in the door at the end of the day is not the time, like clearly from the example you gave, like for me to explode about something. But approaching it almost like an appointment. There is something I need to work through with you, and recognizing that my emotions are my emotions. I know you've got your own stuff going on. And so my goal is not to add to your situation, but to try to work out a better situation for both of us.
Yeah. And I think that, our feelings are not punishments, and our feelings are our own experience. And we're just trying to convey our own experience. Once we do, they can do whatever they want with it. And so it makes us vulnerable to share. But we don't share because we're trying to punish the other person. We're just trying to convey our own experience. And ideally, that actually brings us closer rather than drive us apart. And so last couple of questions and we'll wrap up. One's about interstitial cystitis. And so bladder and urinary symptoms that are chronic and whether this works for that. I do think that we hold a lot of emotions in our pelvis. I think it's quite common. And I had talked about, the burning experience that I had, which I've had a couple of times. And one of my patients has a nice story where she had chronic bladder infections and couldn't get rid of them. And she went and saw a number of physicians and finally saw a urologist who said to her, he's like, look, I don't know how to explain this to you, but when you get mad, you get a bladder infection. And then he like covered up because he thought she was going to hit him. And it turned out like it made total sense to her. She's like, oh, I get it. And then she didn't have any bladder infections after that. And so I do think that with interstitial cystitis, especially in chronic pelvic pain issues, they are quite amenable to this kind of intervention. And I think it can work really well. And then last question. Thank you both of us for sharing. And so when one of us or both of us is angry and it doesn't go as well as planned, how do we reel it back in? And what do we do to signal that we need a break and have to do something different?
That's a good one. That's a
Very
very
good
good question.
Yes.
So thank you for asking that, because I think the last thing I want to do is project the idea that we have it all figured out. I feel like 20 plus years into marriage, we've got a good basis for figuring it out, and we're going to spend the rest of our life together continuing to figure it out. So I feel like sometimes, so when our kids were little, one of the most helpful tools that we used was the timeout. And sometimes we would have a mommy timeout. Like if one of the kids was really struggling with something in an inappropriate way, I would say, I need to go take a mommy timeout. And I'm going to go in my room for 5 minutes, and then I will come back, and you will be safe while I'm gone. But I can't deal with this right now. And so I'd go in my room and I'd do some deep breathing, and I would come out refreshed and able to do it again and to engage again. And so you and I will sometimes do that. One of us will get to the point of like, this is not going anywhere. We just need to step away from this conversation. And taking a timeout is usually sufficient for us to like take a deep breath, come back to the conversation, whether it's 10 minutes later or a couple hours later, and then pick up the conversation pick up the conversation again.
Yeah. And you and I have also, we've worked hard and cultivated techniques and talked about the kids having the spatula and the talking stick, but we have been, we have learned that sometimes like all we want to do is talk over each other. And so we call it the speaker listener technique. It's got other names to it, but we learned it from the book Fighting for Your Marriage, and from a marriage therapist we saw early in our marriage. And it means one person gets to talk and the other gets to listen, and it takes away that tendency to talk over each other. And so I think frequently, and maybe not quite as much anymore, but there have been various times where like we just can't have the conversation, and one of us has to be, oftentimes you, kind enough to say like, we need to move this into speaker listener. And sometimes we take a time out before, or sometimes we take a time out afterwards, but knowing that we're going to be heard oftentimes really de-escalates and makes it possible to finish the conversation and bring it back in. So that, I think, has been one of the more helpful techniques that you and I have learned as a couple.
I agree. And I think we could probably do a whole webinar just on communicating within a marriage. So I hope we'll be able to do that before too long. But I think, yes, creating space for yourself, and also creating a way to formalize the conversation until the emotions have settled into a place where you can communicate again. Those are two really strong strategies.
This is delightful. Thank you for
Thank you.
being here and sharing your experience, and like Linda said, being open and vulnerable. And I know how much it means to everybody to hear these stories. And we will end there for the evening. Thank you for all of you who joined us and listened and asked insightful questions. If any of you who are listening live or listening to the recording feel like we can help, please reach out to our website, cormendihealth.com, and request information, and our staff will be happy to get back to you with ideas about how we can help. This has been recorded, so we will have this up on our website at Cormendi Health on the resources tab, and get to our YouTube page where you will find it. Thank you all for being here and joining us this evening. And Lisa, thank you so much, not just for being here, but for being the love of my life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Have a great evening.